Very good morning to all of you. We have been talking about structural analysis of narrative by Todorov. In our last lecture, we saw certain views of Todorov on the structural method and then theoretical method, descriptive method, etc. At the same time, we understood what a structural analyst do. So what does structural analysis do? That was the matter of discussion. So we understood, actually it's a kind of revision for you people. Just a minute. So in the last lecture, we understood that structural analysis tries to seek, I hope the screen is visible now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So it's try to seek or it seeks to understand the structure behind the actual work. The structure is understood. So it tries to understand the structure of the genre. By genre, we understand the types. Means in terms of literature, we can understand novel, drama, poetry, etc. And within poetry, you can further understand the types such as sonnet, okay, elegy, etc. So it tries to understand the structure of the genre to which that work belongs, first of all, instead of discussing the structure of the individual work. It talks about the genre. Then, Todorov contrasts this particular approach, structural analysis of narrative, with Marxist and psychoanalytical thought. He says that they seek to understand the abstract structure, maybe social or psychic, of the work, instead of learning all that there is. Means instead of knowing the particular work of literature, as the new critics do. Means it focuses on the external factors, not the internal factors. And the structuralists are interested, just like new critics, in the internal features. But they are different from new critics. In a way, new critics only focus on the particular work or the individual work, whereas they try to understand the work as the system itself. So structuralists tend to look at theory or poetics of literature, not at the individual work. The literary discourse they try to understand, instead of talking about the social or psychic side of the literature. In short, we understand that structuralist or structural analysis does not focus on the external features or aspects of the text or the piece of literature. So he states, of course, that description should not be completely thrown out of the window, since the description helps in understanding theory. Means the new criticism is also important. New critics focus on the descriptive side. They try to describe the things. Whereas structural analysis is more interested in theoretical framework, in building the theoretical framework. But description is helpful in coming to the theory. So what he thinks the best stepping stone, I quote Todorov here, toward theory is that of precise empirical knowledge. Empirical means you might know systematic and observable things, the things which can be seen systematically. Science, in the laboratory, science adopts empirical approach. Nirikshan, that is the Marathi word. So through observation, the things are described. So that is what structural analysis do. Then he refers to Henry James. You might be knowing why he was one of the novelists, who used psychology in writing. He is well known for the essay The Art of Fiction, and Todorov refers to Henry James' essay The Art of Fiction to defend structural analysis. He comments that structural analysis, Todorov, I mean to say, the structural analysis owes much of its method to modern science, the empirical method. It much to modern science in terms of its method, because the literature must be studied in relation to everyone else. And then he refers to a passage from Henry James' essay, The Art of Fiction, to defend structural analysis. James actually made two objections in this particular essay. The first objection is that there is no such thing of a pure dialogue in a real text. In a real text, there is no pure dialogue. And the second objection is that the terms of description are not necessary, because a novel is considered a living thing. For him, a novel is a living thing. It is not a non-living thing. Now, to answer these objections raised by Henry James in this essay, Todorov states that the first objection loses all its weight as soon as we put ourselves in the perspective of structural analysis. Okay, I quote Todorov here. So, what he says, James' first objection, that there is no such thing of a pure dialogue in a real text, loses all its weight as soon as we put ourselves in the perspective of structural analysis. Okay, structural analysis focuses on a pure dialogue, although it does aim at understanding of concepts like description or action. Okay, understanding of this concept is important, the concepts like description or action. But he says that there is no need to find them in a pure state. So he rejects this very notion of purity. There is no need of understanding these things in a pure state. So it is rather natural that abstract concepts cannot be analyzed directly. Okay, especially at the level of empirical reality. Abstract means something which we cannot see, something that cannot be observed, cannot be analyzed. Then it is quite natural. How can we analyze something which we cannot see? Because it is invisible, it is abstract. So there is no question of adopting the empirical knowledge over here. Second criticism means the terms of description are not necessary since a novel is considered a living thing. Again, loses its weight, is beat down with a look at what is considered dead and living. When we look at what is dead and what is living, Todorov makes the point that since a work does not contain what other forms have in order to be living, then James' attack is dubious. It is baseless. Why is it baseless? Because a work does not contain what other forms have in order to be living. For example, human beings. We say we are living animals. So there is something, which makes us to be called living animals. And there is nothing of this kind in a text, in a work, which makes us to call it a living thing. So he thinks that this particular attack is dubious, that is baseless. Then he comes to the structural analysis of plot of uh, Boccaccio's Decameron. We've been referring to this all these days. So these are some of the defensive, means after making some defensive remarks, he dives into the structural analysis of plot. Now he makes a caveat. Caveat is a kind of appeal in the court. You might be knowing that. It is a legal term. And he makes a caveat. He makes an appeal. I quote him here. What is an appeal? Let's try to understand. Of course, that does not mean that literature for me is reduced to plot alone. Although he's focusing on plot, what he says, it does not mean that literature is reduced to plot alone, means the plot study of plot is sufficient to understand literature. I do think, however, that plot is a notion that critics undervalue and hence often disregard. So this is the problem. Means although plot is not the only thing to understand literature, but there are many critics who undervalue it. Aristotle had, given it the central place in the study of literature, especially tragedy. But many critics think that plot is not something to be understood as relevant. So in psychological novels by Henry James, etc., we come across such kind of thing. They don't use plot as such. And it is here that Todorov looks into Boccaccio's Decameron for an examination of plot. And he looks at 4 different plots within the Decameron. I have mentioned it that Decameron is the collection of 100 tales by the Italian writer Boccaccio. And after looking at these 4 different plots within the Decameron, he found they had several similarities. So I mentioned that they don't look at the individual work. They look at structural analysis, or the people who are involved in structural analysis look at what we call the contrast and similarities of that genre itself. They come up with a theory. And what he found, that they had several similarities, all these 4 plots, different plots. Therefore, he could come up with a chart to summarize the commonalities, the similarities. He summarized the common things in these plots. Now there is a story, in Decameron, a monk and his abode. Then another story is a nun and an abbess, and 2 other stories of married women and their lovers. So these 4 stories he looks at, and there are 4 plots. So he looks at the story of a monk and his abode, a nun and abbess. So these are very important things that you should note down for your MCQs. Okay, and he looks at other 2 stories of married women and their lovers. In each case of these stories or plots, what we observe is that the low rank person commits adultery. Adultery means going against the moral rules, norms of the society. Adultery is something which is against the morality in relationship, immoral relationship, you can say. So these people who commit to adultery are of low rank before their superiors can condemn them. Okay, and the superiors commit the same sin and therefore don't punish the former characters. So this is what we see. Firstly, the lower rank person commits adultery before the superior condemn them. and the superiors commit the same sin. Therefore, they don't punish the lower rank people. So this is what is going on. If you apply it to politics, you will see the same. Right from the center to what you call to the villages, the same scenario is there. So this kind of similarities are noted down, and then he comes up with an explanation. He makes several explanations after this particular empirical study. He applies structuralism to the study of these plots. Now let's try to understand. If you have studied some syntax, you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to focus here. If you know what is a clause and its elements of clause, you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to tell here. The first explanation made by Todorov is that, they try to, Todorov, he is the structuralist, the one who applies structuralism to literature. So he comes up with the minimal scheme. Now, what is this minimal scheme? Just like the clause, the plot too has its minimal scheme. So the first thing he notes down here is that the minimal scheme of the plot can be summarized by a clause. Means a plot is equal to a clause in language. So this is how he establishes the similarity between linguistic structuralism and literary structuralism. A plot is equal to a clause, the first explanation. Secondly, two parts of speech. Means you might be knowing, a clause consists of nouns, means subject and predicate. But here he refers to two parts of speech, such as proper nouns and their predicates. And these two parts of speech exist in the plots, and these have their semantic value. Means proper nouns and predicates are the two elements, two parts of speech which make a clause. In the same manner, in the plots as well, there are elements which have their semantic value. Thirdly, actions. Okay, actions of the characters can have a positive or negative form, the way we have a positive or negative clause in grammar, in linguistic structures. So you should closely observe these explanations. He's trying to establish the common aspects, the commonalities between a plot and a clause. The way we have a positive clause or negative clause, means a negative sentence or a positive sentence. Actions can have a positive or negative form. And a category of status is needed. Okay, there should be a status in the actions, we talk about the characters must have some kind of status. Low rank, high rank, we talked about just now. Fourthly, there is the element of modality. We talk about modals, modal auxiliaries, possibility, probability, abilities, etc. by using the modal verbs like will, would, shall, should, may, might, can, could. So these kind of modalities or certain actions can be logically assumed before they even happen. Okay, so this is what he talks about, actions, certain actions. Fifthly, there is a point of view. It means we are talking about the elements of plot, characters, point of view, etc. Point of view can be arrived from these statements, negative or positive statements. And sixthly, there are relations between clauses, okay, which might lead to a study of entailment and presupposition. Means one clause is related to another clause, and based on that we can entail or presuppose something. Now, if we have studied semantics, you'll realize it. Entailment in semantics and presupposition. Even in pragmatics, you must have studied. Now, for example, when you say John is Mary's brother, you entail something. We say that John and Mary are siblings. This is the entailment. And what is the presupposition? Okay, we presuppose that the people or persons named Mary and John exist. So that is a presupposition. Means when you make a statement in language, it involves entailment and presupposition. Okay. For example, again I will tell you, Delhi is the capital of India. What does it entail? It entails that India is the name of the country or state. Is that clear? Means the listeners understand it. And what is the presupposition here? When I tell something, I presuppose that you know the place name India. Now I will give you one common example. When I say Mary is a widow, what is entailed over here? What is the entailment involved in this particular statement? This is the clause, Mary is a widow. It entails that Mary was married to someone and the person whom she married is no more. And what is the presupposition? When I am telling it to the other person, I presuppose that the other person knows the person named Mary. So Mary exists for that person. So this is presupposition. So this is how clauses are related to each other in terms of entailment and presupposition. Then here I am trying to tell you that plots have to be understood as clauses. There can be subplot, main plot, or in a way we have what we call main clauses, then we have subordinate clauses in the similar manner. Seventhly, these clauses are organized to form a new sequence, okay, new order. So sequence here is pursued by Todorov. Now he says pursued by the reader as a finished story when there is a logical order. Okay. And finally, there are ways of going from the abstract structure to the original tale. Okay, one can go to the abstract structure. By understanding the abstract structure, one can understand the tale, the original tale. So this is how Todorov tries to explain the plot in terms of its similarity with a clause in a sentence or in language.